By the way, isn't R2D2 fairly useless, by the way? Like, it doesn't have any purpose other than a vague plot point that it can it can carry stuff around, I guess. So, give it a little tray and put a cocktail on it, and there you go. There's your sorry. Sorry,
Well, I
R2D2,
think
but
I think originally it was meant to be like a maintenance robot, right? Like it was had a little bit of
okay.
a manipulator.
It has a little, I know, but that
Yeah.
again is kind of like thrown in as a
Mhm.
little gimmick, right? That
Mhm.
it can manage something in the real world.
Hello, Mark. Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday, Jack. I hear you are busy with the word. So I've got a lot of words I've been working with because I've
Mhm.
finally published something.
Mhm.
Finally. So I think I mentioned last time I got like 5 ideas and like none of them were working until I read some articles about AI. I think it was in the Atlantic, and I guess it was a little bit about whatever the new robot is that Elon wants to sell us, the human robot. So I think I was able to get angry enough to write a whole thing about how dumb I think it is to have human-shaped robots. So
Well,
just
initially
published it.
the idea of the related to the form factor and the design is that what would be actually the design that works best in our world, right? I mean, we have stairs, we have basically the whole architecture is built for two-legged creatures that can go up and down step by
Yeah.
step, that kind of thing. So in a way, personally, I would prefer the R2D2 style of a robot, but that would be probably a little bit harder to navigate. So you would need ramps, right? Or although, in the newer Star Wars movies, R2D2s have those little jets that it can use to fly around. But yeah, I think yeah.
Conveniently, narratively.
Yeah, yeah, but this was CGI time, right? The original, like model of R2D2 would be kind of hard to be equipped, to equip it with a jet engine, so that it can fly. So yeah, so I think there is some sort of idea behind this madness, but yeah, I think this is really very far from because self-driving cars are still far from being perfect, and that's a relatively uh, simpler thing because you have a road, right? You have streets, right? Every road is kind of more or less, generally speaking, in the same format. So learning that environment turned out to be very, very hard. And now you have, let's say my house, and there might be a dog sitting on the floor that's not going to be happy about the robot. It's not going to move away, right? Or there could be, some towel on the floor, and a million and million of degrees of freedoms that have to be addressed. And not sure if we have a model of something like that yet.
Well, thanks for stealing my entire article because you hit every point I made because maybe that's why we're friends. But good for you because those were, well, I think I had maybe a little fun little concept, which is a large experience model. So I think what
Mhm.
the scam is, and the scam is pretty good, right? The scam is if it looks like you, then it must be like you, right? So
Mhm.
easy scam, right? We fell for that pretty much for entirety of human history, I guess, right? It's always the oracles, it's always the thing that they look like you, and so they are you, even though, what do we call it? The mechanical Turks or something,
Mhm.
right? Isn't that as old as it gets?
Yeah, yeah, I guess, yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, I'm just saying because people just inhabit that, Alice in the Looking Glass feel, right? Like if you see something that looks like you, then it must be you.
Mhm.
Whereas, so any exhibit of something that is you like is immediately we festoon it with all of the rationale that we've learned to crawl. So therefore, learning to crawl, is a was learnable. Like now they're doing flips, right? So now it's like, hey, they don't crawl, they do acrobatics. So therefore, because they do acrobatics, then they must know everything it took for a human to learn acrobatics.
Mhm.
Whereas actually the problem itself is almost almost entirely different, right? The Venn diagram probably does not mix at all in what people do. So I had the example of like, I'm sure you could get some sort of robotic soccer player that maybe is good at soccer. I don't know. I'm just guessing, right? Like something where there's, like you said, like the boundary is pretty understood. Hey, you get this ball into the net. That's pretty much it, right? So you know what I mean? That and oh, by the way, you can't do any of these kind of things. And you could just make a robot without hands. So actually, one of the things I like about what you said, and one thing I thought was fun is that, well, we build all this stuff to accommodate our forms, right? We built all these roads to accommodate cars. You know, we build accommodations to robots, and which I consider all these things robots, pretty much, right? They do whatever you tell them to do. Cars don't go off and drive themselves when you're not looking or anything, right? So they're robots, and robots, even if it was the R2D2, who I mentioned as well, is, by the way, isn't R2D2 fairly useless, by the way? Like, it doesn't have any purpose other than a vague plot point that it can it can carry stuff around, I guess. So, you know, give it a little tray and put a cocktail on it, and there you go. There's your sorry, R2D2.
Well, I think originally it was meant to be like a maintenance robot, right? Like it had a little bit of a manipulator.
It has a little, I know, but that again is kind of like thrown in as a little gimmick, right? That it can manage something in the real world, which I think is what you just mentioned, is that so my biggest point was that there is no such thing as a large experience model, right? There's a large language model that we lucked into because we just so happened to spend 40 years putting data into easily accessible containers, right? That were pretty good, that were pretty regular, right? Like if we want to do business talk, that's another subtopic. But like you said, if I go into your house, my example is I'm going to say, where's the bathroom? Right? Because even though we've been in a million houses, well, not, okay, whatever. We've been in a lot of houses, yet somehow there is no model as to where you would put the bathroom other than I would go door to door, right? Like there is no taxonomy of most of the world, which means it's impossible to learn. And I think they had this problem with machine learning, right? That they had to come up with a taxonomy of things where I think it's 1,000 things, something like that, where it had to be finite because it was just too computably difficult. So you had to kind of put things in some bucket, right, to even attempt to recognize them. But of course, there's not 1,000 things. There's a million things, and they can all be piled together, right? So therefore, they're even worse, right? That this piece of junk with a little piece of junk on top of it is now a priceless heirloom, but this shape lying over here is garbage. See what I mean? Like it's easy for us, and we should. And I guess my point is we should really see this as a threat. Actually, it's a threat to wages. That's all I think it is. I think it's just a big middle finger to everyone that said, well, if I can sell a robotic looking person for 80 grand, which is what they're going for right now, you can pre-order them, or 40 grand or 30 grand, or what doesn't matter what the price is, then that is a threat against you of asking for, well, anything, right? Like you're supposed to be scared of it, which is really, I think, bad. Let's just put it that way. That's what I guess I got finally riled enough to finish this article, because I'm like, that's truly kind of evil, right? Even though we do depend on Musk for funding our beautiful podcast, and thank you again for the millions going into our bank accounts every day.
Yeah. Well, so that's a good point, right? I mean, we are going probably beyond the robotics kind of question, but so let's say everybody's got a robot, right? And all the production is robotic, and everybody drives, a robotic whatever car, right? So then the question would be, hey, so do the elites, right? Do the Elon Musks, that and everybody else maybe kind of, in the politics or whatever, do they really need us at that point of time, right? Is the average Joe gonna be needed, right? Because there's gonna be no income to take to take
But I
to
mean,
take
saying
from,
this is the threat that can't happen, right? Like there is no world without us
Yeah.
because we are the world, right? In all practical purposes. We don't live in nature, right? We live in cities that we build everything, right? None of
But
this is
this
real.
is but this is a line of thinking of somebody who goes to museums, who reads books, right? So it's kind of
I
like
have,
you,
hold
Mike.
on,
This is
I have
you.
central heating. I'm just saying, like I know that this world isn't, I didn't build it, right? Like I bought it.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's a great
exactly,
world.
exactly.
We're really lucky, right? Because
Yeah,
building
exactly.
everything yourself is no
But
fun and wouldn't
but
work.
but then you have Leland's, right, and a number of other guys,
I
and
know.
they are kind of thinking, hey, you know, um, probably it would be better to have robots to do everything, right? So
I don't like the Elons is plural. Isn't that weird? Like he's not now he's its own Venn diagram, the Elons. But keep going, sorry.
well, I mean, he is probably the hardest charging, right? In
Well,
in
he
in
is a
those,
poster
right?
child for
Yeah,
some excessive amount of whatever. And I
yeah,
think Jobs was also kind of, in retrospect, fairly foolish, right? Like
mm,
he wasn't all that. Let's put it that way, right? Like it was always a team effort, and it always will be a team effort, And so these
mm,
spearheads, although I will say, and I don't want to derail, von Neumann is my new guy. So we'll get into him in a
mm.
minute, but let's keep going because I can go down that rabbit hole later. But anyway, so yes, the techno optimist. Let's put it that way, right? The futurist, the techno optimist. P.T. Barnum, right? It's always about kind of they're going to profit. I don't know. I don't see how they never put themselves not in a position to profit if they're correct, which is fine, I guess, right? But still, if you're selling fear, well, maybe that is our
Yeah.
topic for today. If you're selling that you can be replaced by a $30,000 robot, Jack,
Mhm.
some people, many may, and maybe should be fearful, right? That in a sense is hardly a reasonable value for someone's time and attention. And I don't think it's true because obviously I think these things will fail spectacularly and never get better because there is no large experience model, right? It's all going to be, it's the hardest problem you could imagine and it can't be solved. Does that make sense? Right? It isn't even computable, as they say, right? Because there is too many variables.
Well, yeah. So I think that there's the scruffy versus neat, right? So if 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 you in your solution in your kind of like mental model of a solution, you have a model that is perfect, that is clean, like a logical AI, right? For example, right, where
Mhm.
you can have a proof that the robot is not going to fail, something like that,
Right,
right?
right.
Then
And
then
it
since
can't,
it's
in a sense, it can't fail, right? That is one
yeah
of its problems.
yeah
If
yeah
it could fail all the time, it'd be great, but then you're back to having humans be better.
exactly
They
yeah
don't
but
fail that
but
often.
But we are not in the logical AI era. We are in the scruffy AI era, where basically partial models, far from complete models, are kind of running the show right now
Sure.
with generative AI. So before the transformers, let's say 10 or 20 years ago, there was a big problem that in robotics, for example, that was the frame problem. So basically, let's say your roof is leaking, right, and you have a bowl, right, and you put that bowl on the table, right, and it's catching all the water, right. So now you have a robot that discovers that there is another leak, kind of a little bit to the side. So what the robot is going to do is the robot going to grab the bowl and kind of hold it, like a few inches to the left to catch the new leak, right?
Hmm.
Or is it going to be smart enough to kind of move the table with the bowl so that the robot doesn't have to hold it, but now it's kind of the ball is on the table, right? So that was the frame problem, right? The ability to reason about the environment so that if, let's say, I move the ball and the ball is on the table, then I'm moving the ball as well, right? So that was a very, very hard problem in AI. And chances are that maybe the Scruffy LLM is just by association, by statistical, kind of like looking into the neural network will find the problem, the solution to that. So the robot is not just gonna, oh, I need to grab the ball, I'm gonna hold it, for the next 24 hours. No, it's gonna use the table, move the table in the right position. So I don't know, but chances are that we might be closer to all this, and the only problem might be is to have a reliable manipulator that is a hand, or reliable kind of like a maybe walking on the carpet versus walking on a slippery floor, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I would be less pessimistic than you actually. That probably you will still have to fix your sink, and dive under the sink and the wrench on the pipes for the next 10 years. But maybe kind of like the simplest issues that require less dexterity will be addressed, but maybe by the $80,000 robot.
Well, okay, so there's a couple of things, and one part that I try to outline is that we are extrapolating this large language model to be a large experience model, right? Like, and that to me is not right. There is no such thing. They're not equivalents. We don't keep data about the real world at all, which I think is a fun problem in itself, right?
That's both, true. That's very true.
We both work for organizations, and we know 100% without any doubt that they keep almost no information about anything that they've ever done, right? Only the tiniest amount of signal comes out and is kept about what organizations actually do, which is obviously really interesting. As we come from maybe an academic background, we're supposed to create artifacts. You know what I mean? There's librarians. There's supposed to be some artifacts of the fact that someone worked at Princeton for 30 years, right? But no, really, there's some anecdotes. Maybe somebody talked about somebody and maybe somebody wrote about it later. You know what I mean? It's very inconsequential the way anything practically is captured. And then you can say that, well, then a lot of it is perspective. It's not real, right? There's no empirical evidence that so-and-so did so-and-so until you sort of get to the end point, and then there's a story. Oh, Einstein or Newton felt the apple hit his head and then discovered the forces matter. Or what, you see what I mean? Like, we had to have some narrative understanding of things rather than an actual understanding of things, because that didn't happen. Like, that wasn't real, but it was just good enough to tell the story of how, I don't know, all these just big discoveries, and that's why I even go to AI. Like, it was really, as usual, just an accident, the attention paper, right? That was just, I don't know, we were working on this thing and it seemed interesting and whatever, right? Like, we stumbled into something, but the luck was, and my point is that we spent 20 years building Wikipedia to be actually a good source of training data, right? That's what was interesting, is that if you didn't have good training data, and you do this every day, right? You can level your fabulous LLMs against your crummy data and get exactly pretty good stuff, actually, because LLMs can make things up and they'll fill in gaps that, whatever, they're great. They'll approximate pretty well. Right? Yeah. I mean, they will, but it doesn't mean that you ever were trying to actually solve the problem of how do you run your business or whatever, right? Or how do you become an institution that can last for a while? No, you just kind of took it for granted that this would just stick around forever, right? Like, hey, we're doing fine. We're going to be fine tomorrow, and so on and so forth. And so the fragility of these things, I guess, is why, yes, if you spent 100 years figuring out what a road is, then you could probably get a computer to do a fairly good job, because, by the way, back to von Neumann, that we now have this matrix multiplying machine, right? Like, the math was always there, just you couldn't do it, right? You couldn't do it in the time it took to make it worthwhile. You know what I mean? Because if you couldn't do these computations so quickly, like, none of this would be interest, right? If you had to wait an hour for a GPT to give you an answer, even now, it's kind of funny how it's like, do you want me to notify you when I come up with an answer? I'm like, if you can't come up with an answer in the next 20 seconds, like I'm bored and I'm going to move on to another topic, right? So I think that's interesting that we just have this acceleration sometimes as being a given, whereas the acceleration is just really just pretty much sheer luck, right? There is nothing hard technically about driving. We do it all the time, and we don't put a ton of effort into it, right? It's not. Walking is harder, and that's what you were saying about for R2D2. Walking for R2D2 would be insurmountably difficult to the point it would fall over, which I think it did a couple times, right? That
Yes.
just getting from here to there is not a given for anything in the real world, unless you have an absolutely perfectly designed system, which we do have. We have warehouses, and warehouses are really rational systems, really rational, right? Like everything is not meant to fall over, and it's meant to deal with things with the idea of there being forklifts and whatever it takes to do things that humans can't do. We're not up on ladders hauling, 50 kilos of brake pads up to be stored. Like we can't do that, right? But when it comes to a hardware store, they don't have robotics because they have so much variety and so many different. Have you ever been in a hardware store, right? Those are probably the best examples. Like they're insane. No one can figure out a Home Depot. They're too complicated because they have too many options, but they're human options. We're okay with it. We can, in fact, we prefer it because I don't want to get on a ladder, right? I was actually, speaking of ladders, total sidebar, I'm in the oldest university in the world in Coimbra, and it's very famous for having this library, which I went into, and it's lovely, right? It's one of those ancient, amazing places. It's somehow amazing even now, and I couldn't really figure this out, but it was amazing for having a population of bats that come in every night and eat all the bugs that would normally eat the books. So there's some ancient good thinking on their hands. And I was still surprised because I was like, I don't see any bats. But either way, what I did see was no obvious way to get up to the stacks, though. Like it's a very tall library. And I spent way too much time trying to figure out, like, where's the staircases? Because remember how books don't scale well, right? Like, well, we need more room, but having him to be human height is a real limitation. So that we have all these real book storage is often done in those big slidey things where only one can be open at a time. Anyway, I'm just saying that engineering wise, we're really clever, but we're always having to do trade-offs between the human ability, which is limited but flexible, and the ultimate goal, which is storage space, longevity, keeping things, record keeping. Probably would have been our job at one point, right? We would have been clerics because we could probably handle the workload. It's like, here, file this, take it, come up with a taxonomy to make sure that we can store these things properly. You and I would be okay with that 100 years ago. But now, we've managed a lot of that. And again, we've benefited from that because these models and what we talk about, right, is AI can do those things. Pretty amazing, pretty good job. But still, we're talking 80%, or whatever. I don't know. I don't even know what percentage. It's pretty good. But when the AI doesn't stop and say, I need to pull over. Whereas now, these self-driving cars, when they get into a situation, they're designed now that it's like, I'm out of my realm. Like I can handle X, just like you have cruise control, right? That used to be the thing. It's like, I don't want to keep my foot on this pedal for the next hour, My wife still hates cruise control for that reason. It's like, oh my God, you're out of control. You're not, it's like, but I was like, yeah, we figured this out. It's reasonable, reasonable risk to save a little energy. on
Yeah.
foot. So either way, I don't know if I tangentialized myself into oblivion there, but um,
Well, yeah. So I think I have a tangent as well. So kind of using AI to kind of do like fundamental things like running a company or something like that, right? I mean, I think this is happening already. I mean, you have the big consulting companies, like the biggest names, and they know everything, and they walk on water, and they are letting go of their people and kind of saying, hey, now it's this report, it's going to be AI, right? And it's going to tell you, hey, here's your company, and you have to do X, Y, Z because that report that we're going to sign is going to say that, and it's going to be a report generated by AI, and now Salesforce is letting go of people because the project managers are replaced by AI systems, and people with a lot of experience are simply kind of like so AI is compressing, right? So the job of a consultant has been kind of like there's like multiple jobs being compressed into one, right? So now the AI is a consultant and a writer, a technical writer, and a designer and a coder, all in one kind of like person who can actually set up the agent to actually do all those things, right? So I think nobody is actually going to be very shy about actually doing something that maybe you are very skeptical about, like running a company. I think it's for better or worse, right? It is happening.
well, as I said, this is the interesting narrative. So we're in two situations. I think that kind of maybe we can explore it a little because it's kind of
Mm.
fun, right? We were talking
Yeah.
about an actual physical proxy, right? I'm going to meet this robot and bring it into my life and pay some fee, and it's going to do X. Okay, and X
Mm.
is very, very fuzzy right now, right? Because, well, what does an employee do? And that's, I think, where I started, which is that, well, that is what's funny. What do we do? And often what we do is we adapt. I think that's what's interesting, right? If we had some formula or whatever, and I can tell you, I think maybe a fun story. Speaking of project managers, so I learned the Scrum technique where you don't have anybody, right? There's no hierarchy of I'm going to keep track of things.
Mhm.
Okay, but somehow we invented this role of somebody that keeps track of things because the people who do things are just not good at keeping track of things,
Mhm.
right? So here's a fun puzzle, right? Is that, well, do you need somebody to keep track of things and somebody to do things? That's debatable, I guess. But I think what we're seeing here is that different organizations have different trust issues, right? So the I don't trust the people will do the work unless we have somebody watching them that I can then have them tell us to make sure that we know that they're watching the people who are watching the people. So what was the panopticon? The there's the idea of the prison that only had a few wardens because it was circular. And speaking of design, right,
Mhm.
that they could see everybody doing everything at once to make sure
Mhm.
that a large amount of people were continually imprisoned and not doing whatever bad things or something like that, right? Like you minimize the amount of guards through design, and perhaps you made it a better profession. I have no idea. Could you be a better guard because you got more information and could see more misbehavior or whatever they did in prisons? And that's the idea, is that now if you give that up to the AI, it isn't metacognitive, so that'll be fun, right? That it doesn't know when it's not it and by the way, should I get into Bloom's taxonomy? Because that's what I got up in front of me. Up like,
Yeah, sure.
well, how do you learn anything? Here, I'll just show it because it's kind of cool. Um, I've never seen it like this, and actually, this is the only time I thought it actually made some sense to me. Does that show up? There we go. Whoa.
Yeah, yeah, that's.
Okay. Well, anyway, I always saw this as a hierarchy, right? And I teach things in a hierarchy. I teach things as a pyramid, and that's this kind of idea that all this stuff down here is not as valuable as this stuff up here. And I've always seen this as a pyramid, and I thought this was actually better because I'm like, well, it's not a pyramid, right? It's just it's just kind of an ever-going process, and you can go through this process all at once. You can, you know what I mean? Like it's not finite. It's a wheel. However, it informs each other, and that's its goal.
Mm.
So back to AI taking over or whatever, these jobs, I'm like, well, I'm trying to see if I can come up with this, which in a sense could take over the job of teaching. Because
Yeah.
if your job as a teacher is to help coach someone through this process, and that is the only goal, right? Is that you've got a topic and you've got some sort of a domain, and you want to see if everyone can manage and practice this set of skills. This set of skills could be a meta prompt, right? And it could have outlooks.
Yeah,
It could.
we always disagree about the fundamental AI, that kind of like those steps, all those steps that you had in your circle, right?
Yeah.
Like synthesizing, reflection, like self-improvement, right? You will say that this is kind of like AI is just surface, right? I will say that AI is deeper, right? Like it's kind of like meaningful, right? It's creating a synthesis. It's not just like shortening the sentences, but actually synthesizing, right? So and then self-improvement and all that stuff. So yeah, I'm not really
I'm just
sure.
saying this is a mechanic. That's all I'm saying. Like this is a
Yeah.
mechanic. It's a thing. It's like game theory, right? It's like this thing where you could hang some progress. And to me, I don't use this in teaching. Although maybe I
Mhm.
do, and I just didn't know it. That's all I'm saying is this is taxonomy 101, right? You're just giving names to things so that you can maybe figure out something more important about them later, rather
Mhm.
than, like I said, most businesses run on a smorgasbord of randomness, right? Like, everything is kind of up to individuals. And
Yeah,
systems are
yeah,
pretty brittle for the most part, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, so let's say that AI is just the facade, right? Like AI is just a very thin layer of some useful things, and there is a deeper thing that is kind of required to have a meaningful, I don't know, reasoning or meaningful intelligence, right? But I think the facade is getting closer and closer to being meaningful, right? I mean, there's those architectures that now they are, like, maybe the danger here is that there is such a basic, like the progress that is heralded as, incredible AI, very often is such a basic kind of like a step. Like the next big thing right now is not large language models, but recursive language models. So the recursive language models, what is it? Well, it is basically that during the inference, the AI is going to stick into the prompt the partial result, and now run the prompt with the partial result in it. And then it does another step and then sticks in something new in there. So, I mean, this is not, rocket science by any means, but apparently it's creating uh, meaningful improvements, right? And to your point, the initial paper, attention is all we need. Again, it was a very dangerous and sophisticated looking paper, but it was just basically, hey, we're going to multiply these matrices a slightly different way. So
Right,
we just,
100%, right,
yeah. So yeah, if you remove all the math, jargon and stuff like that, it was basically, okay, I have a matrix and I have a smaller matrix, and I'm going to multiply the big matrix by the smaller matrix, and now I have the attention model, and now that's the huge breakthrough. So I don't know what to think about it, but I kind of think that if this is a facade, the facade is getting sophisticated enough so that it's kind of you know, getting closer to the real thing, whatever that real thing is.
Well, I mean, isn't this great? Because I think we can see the parallels. This is the
Mm.
thing. You have a human-looking thing doing human-looking actions, and you're going to attribute it to the abilities of a human, right? You're just going to make the equation, even though that the underlying architectures, which is another big part of my gripe, by the way, is energy. Like, I can play soccer for a couple hours with just some carbs. Whereas robots don't work like that. It doesn't scale, right? You don't get the energy efficiencies and you never will. So that's another problem, right? It's just never going to scale because we're just hyper efficient when it comes to how much energy it takes us to do anything. So therefore, pro-human. Hey, we're better at energy. but that again, the architecture behind it also isn't, it is a little, I mean, ML is pretty good, but it probably can be a little bit self-learning, like it can learn how to balance. We've seen that. That's pretty good, right? That I love all that stuff and good for people. Like that's the kind of thing you should do in high school, right? Is like make little battle bots to just learn these principles because they aren't intuitive and I think it's drones, right? I talk about drones a little bit. Like there's a perfect example. They're not human looking at all. But that's why they do the things when controlled by a human that humans just can't do. We can't easily pilot helicopters, right? In order to take shots of us having our nuptials on the beach. That's the kind of thing, like we just can't do that. I couldn't learn how to fly a helicopter to save my life, right? Now, are we going to unemploy helicopter pilots? Of course not. We never employed them in the first place, is the thing. But now we have lots of helicopter shots. So what we've done is, in a weird way, and what the point of the Atlantic corridor, which I agree with, is we just do something else. That's the whole fun, is that we will always just do something else. Amazon can fire as many people as they want. They will still need people that will do something else. And I think if you look into the creativity of the HR processes, boy, that's where AI could really help out. Because talk about an awful process, right? And thank you, everyone watching on LinkedIn. You all suck, right? You've ruined this for everybody. That now, experience is just data, right? It's just a commodity. My friend is interviewing, and he's like, "Well, now I have to go through AI interviews." Which I'm not even sure what the heck that means, but I guess if an AI can call you and ask you some questions, I don't even know, right? But it's definitely branded as an AI interview. But then I'm like, as I said, all that stuff bugs me. And I think in a weird way, I protest it because it's missing the point. It's actually, once you get employed is when you become interesting, which is how do you add value? How do you adapt yourself to this environment in order to create value? Because that is really hard. If you knew how everybody was supposed to act, well, you wouldn't need people. And maybe that's your point. Like sooner or later, yeah, you could just automate everything, I think, right? Isn't that the hope, that one person runs the entire operation? Well, that's great, unless unless you employ a lot of helicopter pilots. You just see what I mean? Unless you're in a world where you just really can't do that. Probably safety, I would think it'd be one of them, right? Because you could have completely automated warehouses, but when they fail, they're going to fail catastrophically, right? That risk is probably not worth the reward of having nobody. It's why what we have security guards, right? The risk of not having somebody around apparently is bad enough to want to employ somebody full time to sit there and play solitaire. Because, right, that's, heck, banks, right? There's not even any money in these banks. And yet we hire, anyway, sorry. So I'm just saying, you're saying that the models, and here's where it gets interesting. Sorry, diatribe over. But here's where it gets interesting. So the reason why von Neumann comes up is, he invented computing, which really he is not a very celebrated guy for what he's done because he was the polymath, right? He was the one who had interests in all of these things, but he embodied what I think is the problem with LLMs or any progress at all, which is state mechanics, right? This is the thing, is if you don't manage state, and state could be considered memory or could be considered learn, you know what I mean, is it's the state that these are in has to evolve, which I don't think is possible, right? Like, I think they're stateless, to be quite honest. I understand that they can be you can fake state out through prompts, right? But really an LLM doesn't have an agenda, right? It doesn't want to do anything, and it can't learn, quote unquote, because it has to understand success and failure of its output. While we can use words to say, I don't like what you said, or tell me more, you know what I mean? We could do the whole Eliza thing, but Eliza never learned either, right? It is only going to maintain statelessness. Whereas I think that's what von Neumann was really interested in, right? Is the state is kind of everything. State is persistence. Like it can be a complex thing and maintain state is just part of my fascination of why I went from a bunch of words in a database to try to figure out, like, well, how does anything capture state? How does Markovian stuff even work, right? How does it know that it did all these things, yet there is no evidence that it did all these things? And I think, LLMs are just the perfect embodiment of that, right? Like, I think you could have gone and given it all of literature and everything that people imagine, right? Here's all the New York Times articles and stuff. And it wouldn't really know how to communicate any better is if you just gave it a bunch of random words in Wikipedia, right? It's still just going to make sense out of a bunch of words, or a bunch of not even words, right? Just a bunch of phonemes. It's just going to say, hey, it just so happens that these things just happen to do this. And luckily we have this crazy, somewhat useful noise reducing thing called matrix multiplication, right? Because fitting's real and aliasing is real in every thing. Sorry, I was just going into this a minute ago. So you can stop me anywhere you want. All I'm saying is aliasing is the interesting point, right? When you think something is there and it isn't there, and then you act as though it is there. And that is the biggest, that's the problem with everything, right?
Yeah, so that's where we always disagree. I mean, this is a classical example.
Tell me what I need to be wrong. I need to be.
So let's say you got a present from Elon, right? And you got this $80,000 robot, and it walks into your kitchen, right? And you have a leak, right? So now you're gonna tell the robot, hey, if this thing is always leaking, but if you kind of like wiggle a little bit the valve under the sink, it's gonna get better, right?
Okay.
So let's say you told this to your robot, right? And the robot has stored this either as a wave file, so it's a sound file, or translated into text, or translated into a knowledge graph, or translated it into a logical statement. So whether it did nothing or just remembered the sounds, or whether it's translated into super sophisticated knowledge representation, did the robot learn something, right? And then the argument could be that no, it's really kind of just stored the information that you provided, that is kind of connected to an action, so that the robot now, if it sees the leak, it's going to wiggle the valve and it's going to fix it, right? Because that's a very specific knowledge that otherwise you probably wouldn't know. Maybe it's something that you figured out after years of experience with your thing. So is that knowledge that the robot got now? Did the robot learn something? Or not, right? And in my opinion, right, no matter what the representation is, that is a knowledge fragment that the robot now has, that can act on, and really,
seriously though, isn't that just a data fragment? Really, I mean, you can't give it that much because it has to be tested. It has to be acted upon in order to become knowledge. Is my thing. Like this is just a data point.
Well, yeah, but let's say that the robot can act on it, right? So now next time.
Well, then I'm saying then that's where I think everything falls apart, because action is then insane. You can see the leak, which is a good metaphor, right? Which is the leak is a problem. Why is the leak a problem? Well, things deteriorate. But I mean, you have to kind of have a pretty decent mental model of the world to understand what leaking is in general.
Yeah.
And then I was a plumber once, so I wish, because I do have a lot of leaky faucets, even though I know how to fix them, but I'm like, well, no, you need a particular kind of wrench, and you need to go and you need to take the thing to the hardware store to get the exact, diameter. And yeah, it's kind of a pain in the ass, and I put it off, even though now I have four leaky things. But you're right. If I could have Super Robot Bill come in and I'm like, hey, can you fix these poor four leaks? It literally can't with all the knowledge in the world, because that's why you need plumbers. Is there's always going to be some there's just so much nuance to the fixing part, right? Like, in fact, and that's why plumbers like myself are terrible, because sometimes we use the wrong tools, we use the wrong techniques, we get the wrong. You ever seen those people who drive up in the cars that are supposedly, well, like, the stock in the car has to be really good in order to fix most problems, because you don't want to go, you don't want to have to run off to the store like I do every 5 minutes when I'm trying to do a project, because I just don't know. I just don't know what I'm going to encounter.
Yeah.
And again, luckily I lived in a design world. Like, if I was out in the middle of nowhere, it's like, oh, all right, go ahead and get your machete and craft. Well, and they did. At one point, they made aqueducts and stuff, right? Like, that stuff wasn't random. It took forever. And I think that's my problem, is I just don't think we understand the time commitment to problem solving. And we certainly are not very respectful of expertise, right? Like, you can go ahead, Amazon, fire all the people you want. I think that's the hugest mistake, is you should keep them around to understand what they did in the first place. And I think that if we took that on as a nation, it'd take about 5 years to understand even vaguely what people do. You know what I mean? In an organization, right? This is an artificial world, right? If you took it to be what do instructors do? That's my problem of the article I'm trying to write, which is I don't know that we don't do much, right? If we're just there to assess and lecture, right? Like, we know it and we're going to tell you about it, and then you're going to tell us back what we told you. Ouch, right?
Yeah.
And if you get any of that wrong, it's easy for me because I already know it and I told you, but you got it wrong. So I'm going to be like, are you sure about that? Don't you remember me saying? You see what I mean? Like, we're still in the same rut, which isn't the circle I was talking about. Because I'm feeling like, my two biggest things for the future that I think you could agree with. Number one is analog computing, because I actually believe that if you don't translate something, then it becomes really powerful, right? Everything you talked about, really, remember, all these logical leaps are all translations of one thing into another. And with translation comes noise, which was von Neumann and everybody's problem, right? Is everything's going to get a little fuzzier. But that's fine. We come back here and they learn exactly what to do, being smart. How much do you need in order to not? In fact, von Neumann was coming up with the whole reason that computers can compute is because they can deal with data and they can deal with operators. And he realized the ratio you need so that noise doesn't take over and it all becomes meaningless, which was a huge leap, because normally light switches just go on and off, right? They don't care. But I was talking earlier about virtual light switches or virtual bulbs, and the problem is nobody figured out how to do the mechanics of smart homes, because it's too complicated to have a hub and spoke approach, right? The hub has to know every state of everything in your house. These are just like light bulbs that go on, those stupid things. Like, you're supposed to say, hey, light bulb, go on. Well, they don't know when the power's off. So the state mechanics collapse pretty much instantly, because it isn't like remember what was it? Torrents, right? Remember torrents? Okay, well, that was a clever way to say, well, there is no central hub, like nothing, no one thing knows everything. Everything knows everything, right? And that's the new model, by the way, 2025. It took them that long to figure this thing out, right? And you'd think, yeah, but everything was hub and spoke because you needed command and control, much as we can use this metaphor for businesses, right? We need strong leaders and lots of hierarchy, command and control to handle all the spokes. So maybe my new mindset is, no, we need the spokes to control each other, right? Like the spokes have to all contain state of what every other part is doing, and therefore they become resilient. And that's actually not I don't teach MBAs, but I'm sure that is that is kind of probably a more of a military model, right? That you have different roles, and those roles have to work interchangeably and sort of cooperatively, and they have to maintain state because you're not always going to have your lieutenant there barking orders at you all the time, right? You've got to improvise together. You've got to, whatever what those things do. And then to make my point even more confusing, another bit of this was talking about back to drones, as drones are lethal now, right? But imagine instead of lethal drones, you had cyborg, stormtroopers. And you can see now, well, those wouldn't do anything, right? Like, that's not the model of how you win fights, is to have human-shaped things going on the battleground and fighting, right? Sorry, this is the T2. I'm messing with Schwarzenegger here, but right, you just don't have humanoid destruction machines, right? Because there's no reason they need to be human shaped, and human shaped is a big liability when you could just fly, and does that make any sense? So all I'm saying in this diatribe is that we're just going to have to invent new stuff. That's the replacement theory. It's just, we're not going to go away, but we do have to fight the fears. Maybe I think that's true, right? Do you at least give me that one, that some of this is just meant to provoke us?
Probably. Yeah. I mean,
IGI, I think, is there just to provoke us, right? Because I'm like, since then, when did we need smart people? Like, that's never been a thing, right? Oh, wait, we can't do anything until we consult with the smart person has never been said ever, right? People just do it anyway. or they're Markovian, hey, it worked the last time, we'll do it again.
Yeah. I mean, there's such a big ethical dimension, kind of social dimension
100%,
to all this.
yeah.
So, and those are maybe, more important. I mean, I am a technology person, right? So I'm really interested in those matrix multiplications, probably more than in the kind of like deep ethical problems, and because I don't read that kind of literature and really don't know much. But yeah, I think on the human level we all kind of feel that something is really wrong, that is kind of like looming on the horizon, right? Whether it's robots replacing plumbers, or whether it's self-driving cars that are kind of like not really great, and at the same time replacing such a big part of the population, and kind of like a maybe like a romantic kind of a job. I mean, there is the country music, being a truck driver is kind of a big deal, right? I mean, it's and I can see the fascination. I always wanted to be a truck driver, when I was growing up, kind of going down Route 66, that kind of thing. But to your point, I think that all this is kind of like we are not gonna be able to kind of affect too much, because the driving forces are kind of like okay, so we have NVIDIA that's putting out as much compute as they possibly can, and then there is everybody else trying to buy as much as they can, and there is the power plants that they are trying to build as quickly as they possibly can. And then, I just read something, kind of a little bit ominous and kind of felt right to me. But maybe, it's basically, hey, why are we racing so quickly? Well, we want to race to, we want to race to the super AI, and then make sure that nobody else gets it, right? So that kind of feels like a Cold War kind of like mentality that is still everywhere. And I don't know, but I kind of agree with you on the human level that, yeah, I mean, this is kind of like a lot of this thing is those things are wrong, you know, and feel wrong and going in the wrong direction.
Well, and it's a prediction market, right? Like
Mm.
I'm just counseling and trying to write about, and to this point is I think it's incredibly significant for sure. I mean, I'm was just talking about my complete adoption of AI, except that the adoption is more about, well, it's just freed me up to understand or explore some things that I would normally explore, right? Like my inner laziness has been augmented by its ease, you know and there's a lot to be said that the library, the library that's now just a artifact. That's the problem with it, right? You go into this beautiful library and it's like none of this stuff is useful, right? It's a bunch of ancient Portuguese, I guess, all
Yeah.
beautifully bound and hundreds of pages, which would take someone,
Mm.
a decent
Yeah.
amount of time to get through. And then
Yeah.
what is it going to say, right?
Lifetimes.
It's going to talk about how bloodletting is a really great thing to do when somebody shows this problem up, and I think that's the thing, is that we're just assuming that the world is a bunch of solvable problems, which it isn't, right? It's a process. It should
Mm.
always be one, right? And and of course, or not of course, but I think realistically our goal is to take care of each other, right? That we need to care for each other. That's why we're here. And hopefully one of those people is a plumber that I could maybe
Mm.
hire to fix these leaky things rather than have to learn plumbing
Mm.
all over again to fix them. Although I will say there's some easy plumbing and hard plumbing. So that's where it's
Yeah. Yeah. Hard plumbing is the plumbing when everything is rusted, right? And it's about to
Oh, no,
break.
no,
That's the
it's the easy plumbing. You cut it out and you replace it. That's the easy stuff, right? Like the whole rip out your guts cancer removal thing is easy. You just go in, cut it all out, and then you're done, right? And then try to stitch it all back together. But no, treating it and the person around it is where it gets hard. And I think, if we can wrap up our weird, what is it? We're talking about like AGI because it can talk, then therefore it's intelligent, right? And therefore, just because you look like a person, you can act like one.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, is we can't attribute our abilities to these things. And just because, like you said, there's this job thing, but jobs are a construct too, right? They're used, I always say, or maybe I don't know why I always say it, but there used to be like, hundreds of thousands of coal workers, and now there's like no coal workers, but we still have just as much coal, right? Like it just is a different, we managed to make coal removal less laborious. And I think that's this thing, is I think we should make project planning less laborious. By the way, super big hint. I was going to mention this earlier, but we went through all this training and we had all these ways to keep track of the work we were doing because we're supposed to use, this system and everything. Only one thing worked: a whiteboard with sticky notes. That was the only thing that worked, that actually, and I mean worked, like actually did its job. Anything that was virtual never worked because it just wasn't there to glance at. And that was the thing. And it was this glance ability that made it really interesting, that when somebody went over and they took their thing into ready to test, that everybody noticed that you moved the thing to ready to test. Whereas now you get a, hey, so and so has assigned you a work item, like even now that's so crude and unpleasant
Mm.
that most people don't need somebody to do that for them because they just dislike it so much, right? And I know this happens to you, right? So and so has assigned you an item. So and so has, anyway. All those systems are not the way we like to operate, right? Because we're getting way too much signal for way little value. Whereas, just like driving, I think, driving to me has always been a vaguely defensive thing. Like, I want to get here as fast as possible, but I don't want to die. And so you come up with strategies to manage that. And my friend yesterday, who was driving his Tesla, and Tesla is not driving itself. Sorry, Nick. was freaking me out because he was driving like right behind somebody really fast because these Teslas are so fast. And I was thinking like, I think the auto driver would drive safer than you because I live in a world where this person's going to stop suddenly, right? And then you are going to, and I'm like, I avoid that at all costs because I don't, you know what I mean? I'm trading off like, okay, I'm going to get there a couple of minutes early versus being lazy and saying I'd rather just drive as neutrally as possible with little chance of anything happening. But not everybody does that, So that's the thing. You got different strokes. That's why teams are good maybe sometimes. Somebody's going to be more reckless, somebody's going to be more conservative, somebody, whatever. Jack, 12:30. Get back to work, man.
Yeah, it's time to stop reflecting and start typing commands.
Something like that. But always a pleasure. Thanks for this. This was fun. I might actually write this up a little bit better. I'll send it. See what you think of my robot article, and I'll talk to you next week.
All right, sounds great. Talk to you soon.
Later.